Gore gets Illinois, Michigan, and New Jersey. Part of our CBS News election night headlines of the hour. Biggest poll closing hour of this election night. Gore has won Florida and starts to score other significant wins, including now Illinois and the battleground state of Michigan. Bush wins big in his home state of Texas and is by no means out of the race. It's 8 p.m. in the East, and here's the electoral vote count right at this moment. 121 for Bush, 119 for Gore. And here's the national popular vote count at this hour. Bush running very well ahead of Gore, but remember, it's still early. This is, however, the national vote count. Gore has scored big this hour. Some big dominoes lined up and still waiting to fall. There's several major battleground states out there waiting. Pennsylvania, which is at this particular moment may be the most interesting state on the board, 23 electoral votes. The polls just closed in Pennsylvania. Nobody knows how it's going to go. And Missouri, with 11 electoral votes, also has had, supposed to have the polls closed. As we told you earlier, judges ordered the polls stay open because lines were so long in St. Louis, so Missouri may be a long time coming in. But Florida, which could be make or break this night, has gone to Gore. This much we can say. If Gore had lost Florida, our estimate is that he does carry it. But if Gore had lost Florida, you might be saying sayonara to his hopes. The polls just closed in 16 more states and D.C., worth 202 electoral votes. Now, in descending order of their electoral vote importance, let's look them over. Texas, the Lone Star State, 32 electoral votes. Seldom has heard a discouraging word for any Republican in the Southwest, and so it is with George Bush. He carries his home state of Texas. 22 electoral votes from Illinois. The Democrats got the willies about this state in the late going, but they carry it for Gore. A big win for Gore. Certainly helps keep his hopes of the presidency alive. In Michigan, 18 electoral votes. Union labor helped Gore tremendously there, but that wasn't the only thing that delivered that victory for him. 18 electoral votes for Michigan. This is the heart of the Gore comeback, winning Illinois and Michigan. Also New Jersey, 15 electoral votes. The Garden State is green for Gore. North Carolina, 14 electoral votes for Bush. It was expected, but certainly very, very helpful in keeping Bush's electoral vote lead. As you know, it's 121 to 119 at the moment. In Massachusetts, 12 electoral votes. The tide is in the Bay State for Gore, as expected. Maryland, 10 electoral votes. Strong Democratic state, has gone for Gore. Connecticut, 8 electoral votes. Joe Lieberman's home state has also gone for the Gore-Lieberman ticket. Oklahoma, Boomer Sooner, 8 electoral votes dropped for Bush there. Mississippi, 7 electoral votes from the Magnolia State for Bush. Kansas, moving now out into the plains, 6 electoral votes. Kansas, always a strong Republican state, is again this time. Delaware, 3 electoral votes. Put those in the Gore column. District of Columbia, 3 goes for Gore. Now, these states also just closed their polls, but the races are too close to call, and there's some big ones in here. Pennsylvania, Missouri, Tennessee, Alabama, and Maine. Mark well Tennessee. Al Gore is in the fight of his political life in Tennessee. It could be, nobody's predicting it, that if Tennessee should go to Bush, it could wind up denying Al Gore the presidency. We'll have to see. That's one of the reasons that a lot of eyes are on Tennessee. You can put together a scenario here where it comes down to Tennessee, and Tennessee's 11 electoral votes, should they go to Bush, could be the decisive difference. We'll simply have to see as the night goes along. Just mark it, and we'll play it as it goes throughout the evening. Pennsylvania, perhaps the most important state on the map at the moment, 23 electoral votes. The polls have closed. It's believed to be extremely close in Pennsylvania. I'm prepared to say that they're playing what amounts to a sudden death overtime in Pennsylvania. It's that close. Now, here's how the race for the presidency looks on the national map. States in blue have gone to Gore. States in red carried by Bush. Any state where the light is blinking means that it's a turnover from the 1996 election. Only one, Kentucky. It went for the Democrats in 1996. It's gone for the Republicans tonight, has Kentucky. All the states in red. As you can see, Bush running very well in the South, in the mid-Atlantic states, at least as far as the Carolinas and Virginia are concerned, and in his home state of Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. It takes 270 electoral votes to win. The polls are still open in all the states in gray. Let me show you on this map here now. The states in gray, that includes Louisiana and Arkansas, but also Wisconsin and Minnesota, all of these states in gray, and New York State, still have the polls open. The states in white are where the polls have closed, but right now they're too close to call. Maine, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania with a big 23. Would be surprising to some people. Ohio's 21 electoral votes are still in play, widely expected to go for Bush, but the way this night is going, wild and woolly as it is, who can say? And in Missouri, the polls have closed in some parts of the state. Is that correct, Ed Bradley?
In some parts of the state.
In some parts of the state. Don't want to confuse anybody. In and around St. Louis, the lines were so long at closing time that a judge decreed that around St. Louis, the polls in Missouri would stay open until 11 o'clock New York time. That would be about another 3 hours. We'll triple check that. But certainly the polls in St. Louis are staying open late in Missouri. That could be a late reporting state. So take a look at it. 121 Bush, 119 Gore. Folks, on presidential election nights, it doesn't get any closer than this, although in this particular case, it just might. Now, let's pause, take a breath. The Senate, keep in mind, is up for grabs tonight. And with the polls closed in some states here, the Senate winners at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Texas Senate, Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson is elected to another term. That's a hold on for the Republicans. Pennsylvania Senate, Rick Santorum has held on to his GOP seat there. Massachusetts, Ted Kennedy gets another term. It'll be his 7th term. That, of course, is a hold on for the Democrats. In Tennessee, Dr. and Senator Bill Frist, first termer, gets a 2nd term. The Republicans hold on there. No surprises in this list so far in the Senate races. Maryland Senate, Senator Paul Sarbanes, 4-termer, goes back for a 5th, hold on for the Democrats. In Connecticut Senate, and mark this one, Senator Joseph Lieberman, another Senate term. Now, if Lieberman is also elected vice president, Connecticut's Republican governor gets to replace Lieberman in the Senate with a Republican. But for purposes of tonight's count, this is a hold on for the Democrats in Connecticut. Mississippi Senate race, Senator Trent Lott, the Republican Senate Majority Leader, is returned for a 3rd term. Hold on for the Republicans. Maine Senate, same story. Senator Olympia Snowe gets a 2nd term. That's a hold on for the GOP. And in the Delaware Senate, now, here is a turnover. Republican Senator William Roth Jr., 5 terms, 79 years old, is beaten by Democratic Governor Tom Carper. That's a pickup for the Democrats in the Senate. May not make much difference since Rob has lost down in Virginia. More about that later on, but a pickup for the Democrats in the Senate race from Delaware. Now, here's a look at the Senate races and how they look on the national map. We started the night, 34 Senate races up for grabs. The Democrats need to win 15 on the night to regain control of the Senate. The Republicans need to the Democrats need to pick up 20 on the night. As you were, the Democrats need to pick up 20 on the night to regain control of the Senate. The Republicans need to pick up 15 on the night to hold on to the Senate. The Republicans right now are looking pretty good in that category. Keep in mind that the big Hillary Clinton versus de Blasio race in New York, the polls are still open and will be for almost another hour, so we don't know how that one's going to go. But right now, it's looking good for the Republicans to hold on to the Senate, but there's still a long way to go. Let's look again at the current presidential electoral count. In the race for the presidency, 270 needed to win. 121 for Bush, 119 for Gore is our CBS count at the moment, with 270 needed to win. All the states in red have gone for Bush. All the ones in blue have gone for Gore. The blinking red light in Kentucky means a turnover from the last presidential election in favor of the Republicans. The states in white, the polls have closed, but no decision yet. All the states in gray, the polls have not yet closed, and that includes New York with a big 33 electoral votes. Ed Bradley at the presidential desk. Big win for Gore in Michigan. How did he do it?
He did it in Michigan because his 2 core constituent groups in that state came through for him. As you know, Michigan is one of the biggest union household states in this country. And if you take a look at how the union households voted, they make up 42% of the voters in Michigan. 63% of them went for Al Gore. A second core constituent group for the vice president, African Americans. The turnout was about the same as it was 4 years ago, but take a look at this. Al Gore got 92% of the vote. Bill Clinton, who always does so well among African Americans, got 82%. So he did 10 percentage points better than the president did 4 years ago. And also another interesting fact, the McCain voters, you know, John McCain won the Michigan primary. 34% of his voters, the McCain voters, voted for Al Gore.
Indeed they did, Ed Bradley. I can hear some people at home saying, who Indeed, they did, Ed Bradley. I can hear some people at home saying, whoo, if the electoral vote count is now what Dan Rather and CBS says it is, 121 for Bush, 119 for Gore, it seems to me just a few minutes ago, Bush had a long lead. His lead has evaporated and been melted faster than ice cream in a microwave. What's happening here? Well, what's happening is some of the, first of all, Florida went for Gore. That's the biggest thing that's happened to Gore's chances so far. And then Illinois and Michigan fell in line for him. New Jersey also came around for him. But Bob Schieffer, this by no means is that Gore is going to be the next president. Bush is still very much in the hunt. For one thing, he leads by 2 electoral college votes.
But the fact is, the fact that he has won Michigan and has won Florida keeps him in the game, keeps Al Gore in the game. Those are things he had to do. I would also add to what Ed Bradley was saying. This is not very good for Governor John Engler. Back during the primaries, Governor Bush put his fate in the hands of Governor Engler, and he got beat by John McCain in the Republican primary out there. Again, tonight, he puts his fate in the hands of Governor Engler, and he loses the state. I happen to know they didn't want McCain to come in and campaign for him out there. That might have been a bit of a mistake.
Thanks, Bob. Let's kiss this electoral vote again for you. 121 for Bush, 119 for Gore. This is the way the map looks at this moment. Our CBS News election night coverage, it's a real hot race. Couldn't be any tighter. We'll continue after these messages.
CBS News election night coverage is sponsored in part by Samsung. Welcome to the Samsung Digital Experience, where everyone's invited.
Back at CBS News election headquarters in New York. The presidential race is crackling like a hickory fire here. Couldn't be much closer. 121 for George Bush, 119 for Al Gore. This is the way the Electoral College map looks. Remember, all those states in white are where the polls have closed and no decision has yet been announced. But yes, Gore, blue, has captured Florida. Now remember, Florida is the state where Jeb Bush, the brother of George Bush, is the governor. And you can bet that Governor Bush will be madder than a rain-down rooster that his brother, the governor, wasn't able to carry this state for him, to say nothing, Bob Schieffer, about Governor Engler up there in Michigan, which is also dropped for Gore. But no Democrat should be laughing too hard, because George Bush not only leads in the Electoral College vote, even after Gore has taken big states like Illinois, Michigan, and Florida, but there's still plenty of states out there, enough for George Bush to win this presidential race going away. That could still happen. John Roberts is in Nashville with the Gore campaign. John, they must be feeling pretty good down there.
Oh, Dan, this is huge for them, because they knew if they lost Florida, they were going to have to run the table on the rest of the battleground states, which is why they plugged $2 million in advertising into that state in just the past week. And the vice president spent between midnight and 8 a.m. this morning in Tampa and in Miami. As far as Michigan goes, too, he was there the previous night. The local campaign chairman had said, give me one more visit. I think I can pull this one out. They also plowed $2 million worth of advertising into that state. Now, Pennsylvania, they figure if they can get this, they're only 19 electoral votes away from a win. So they sent Jesse Jackson there. He was going to come here to Nashville. They diverted him. They said, get out there, walk the precincts, make the telephone calls, get us that state. Dan?
With John Roberts, Tennessee is still out. The polls have closed. 11 electoral votes there. We've mentioned the theory, only that it could come down to Tennessee, and Tennessee could cost Al Gore the presidency. Any talk about that there?
Well, Dan, of course, they're worried more really, though, I think, for the home state win than they are the actual electoral vote count, because they think if they can get Minnesota, which they believe they can get, they're only 9 electoral votes away. Washington State, they say, has been looking pretty good for them in the last week. There's also the possibility they could pick up 4 in Iowa. Maybe they could get a couple here and there and cobble together these 9 electoral votes. So if they get Pennsylvania and if they get Minnesota, then all bets are off, and they really believe that with the remaining battleground states, they can pull out a win. Dan?
Well, hope springs eternal, and we shall see. Let's go to Anthony Mason. Anthony, Michigan for Gore. How did the unions do this besides spend a lot of money and invest a lot of time?
Well, Dan, we're taking a look here at what union members think, and the numbers we're coming up with are quite clearly leaning in Gore's favor. And let's show you how here. Let's go to the map, first of all, because this is really interesting. In all of the key states that we're going to show you here, all of those are battleground states. And interestingly enough, 20% or more of the electorate in every one of those, and they include Pennsylvania, California, New York, Michigan, All of those states have 20% or more that are union voters. Now, we asked union voters today, what are you looking for in a candidate? Here's what they told us. 20% say that we want a candidate who cares about the people, who cares about us. We also asked union voters, should the government do more to solve problems? This is an Al Gore issue. When he harped on in the campaign, 56% of union voters said yes. Okay, so union voters there sliding along Gore's way. Ed Bradley talked about how seniors were helping Gore in Florida, so we're not going to go that way, so I'll send it back to you, Dan.
Anthony Mason will catch you on the backside of that. This is commercial television. We got money to make here in just a moment. This is the way the electoral count looks at this hour. 121 Bush, 119 Gore. Gore's been surging back, but this is still a very open race. The electoral map looks like this: red for Gore, red for Bush, blue for Gore. White, these polls have closed, but no verdict yet. In all the gray, the polls are still open. Our CBS News election night coverage of a very tight, very interesting presidential race will continue after these messages. Back at CBS News, election accuracy central. With 270 electoral votes needed to win, Bush has 121, Gore has 119. The electoral map looks this way. Red, those states have been carried by Bush. Blue, including Florida, Illinois, and Michigan, and New Jersey, been carried by Gore. The interesting thing at this moment, these states in white are states where the polls have closed, but we do not yet have decisions. The two big ones, Ohio and Pennsylvania. If Bush were to win one, never mind both of those, he would jump far out front again. However, while the polls have closed, we simply don't know how they're going to go. Same story in West Virginia. Missouri's 11 electoral votes are up for grabs. And Tennessee, keep an eye on Tennessee. Is it going to be the state that denies Al Gore the presidency? The polls are closed there. Maybe a while before we know, but something to watch. Also down in Alabama, a state that you would have thought could have been called early, expected to go Republican, has not yet been called. Once again, the electoral vote count, 121 for Bush, 119 for Gore, and the big states hanging out there now are Pennsylvania with 23, Ohio with 21, Missouri and Tennessee with 11 each, to say nothing of Alabama, which has 9. Dan Rather at CBS News Election Headquarters in New York. Stay with us. Alabama for Bush, Arkansas too close to call. Those are among the CBS News Election Night headlines at this hour. Alabama, the jackhammer state, drops the hammer on Gore, goes for Bush as expected. For the first time in 48 years, Republicans believe they have a real chance to control the White House and both houses of Congress. But Al Gore and the Democrats are fighting back hard in this recent hour and a half, vote for vote, house to house, in the political equivalent of hand-to-hand combat. This is the all-important electoral vote count at this moment. Bush has had a lead since the very start, but his lead is now shakier than cafeteria jello. 130 to 119. 270 needed to win. And this is the national popular vote count at this hour. The only poll closing at this hour is Clinton's home state of Arkansas, and like Gore's home state next door, it's too close to call. Now, George Bush, not only does he have the electoral vote lead, 130 to 19, but let's show you on the electoral vote map. While Gore has been having some big wins in Illinois, Michigan, Florida, perhaps the biggest of the night, there's still plenty of room on the board for George Bush not only to win the presidency, but to win it comparatively early. For one thing, Pennsylvania, 23 electoral votes. The polls have been closed quite a while in the Keystone State, perhaps now the key to the whole election, no decision. Next door in Ohio, 21 electoral votes. That state was expected to go for Bush. It may yet go for him, but the polls have been closed in Ohio for, an hour? And still no decision there. Then in Tennessee. Now, Al Gore may be as cross as a snapping turtle about this Tennessee situation because it's his home state. He would have expected and hoped to have that already colored blue. It isn't, and the Bush people are continually very confident they will carry it. Next door in Arkansas. Arkansas with 6 electoral votes, Bill Clinton's home state. Again, the George Bush forces ended the campaign very confident that they would carry Arkansas. The George Bush forces ended the campaign very confident that they would carry Arkansas. Now, the polls have closed in Arkansas, no decision there yet. In Missouri, this has been a complicated situation. 11 electoral votes there, and you say, well, only 11 electoral votes. Folks, in a vote this close, in a presidential election this close, 11 electoral votes could, the electoral college votes could be the difference. And in Missouri, the lines were so long in St. Louis, a judge decreed that the polls could stay open for a while. The polls are closed in other portions of Missouri. Now, looking ahead to the next hour, what would you say with the closing at the top of the hour, 9 o'clock, Ed Bradley, important states to look for?
I'd say Minnesota and Wisconsin, states that are normally expect to go Democratic, but Ralph Nader is a big factor in both of those states. He was as high as 8% in the polls in Minnesota.
And Bob Schieffer, looking out west, Gore absolutely positively still has to have California. Oregon and Washington, both where the polls are open and will be open for quite a while, both up for grabs. Dangerous country for Gore because Nader's a factor there.
Well, again, Ralph Nader is a factor in both of those states. So we're not going to know for a while, Dan, how this comes out. It may come down to Washington and Oregon.
Electoral vote count 130 for Bush, 119 for Gore. Let's talk about advertising in this presidential campaign. Short while ago, we tried to go to Mike Wallace, but Florida dropped for Gore in the meantime. Going to go back to our old friend Mike Wallace, the 60 Minutes man. And Mike, tell us about the advertising.
Well, Dan, as I was saying when Al Gore's victory in Florida interrupted us, I've not heard the name of Ralph Nader until just a couple of minutes ago when Ed Bradley and Bob Schieffer were talking about it. This despite the fact, you know, they've spent up to $1 billion, according to John McCain, during this campaign on television commercials, local and national. Well, despite all of these commercials that have assaulted and bored the dickens out of us the past few months, there were just 2 ads that caught my fancy. Take a look.
Grilled tenderloin for fundraiser, $1,000 a plate. Campaign ads filled with half-truths, $10 million. Promises to special interest groups, over $10 billion. Finding out the truth, priceless.
I want to vote for the lesser of 2 evils. I want to be lied to.
I want to be apathetic.
I want tax breaks for the very rich.
When I grow up,
I
want to be disillusioned,
disenchanted,
disenfranchised. When I grow up, I want politicians to ignore me.
Is this what you want from your government? Or do you want something better for yourself and the next generation?
They wouldn't let Ralph Nader into the debates. He charged $10 for a seat at his crowded rallies. He played it earnest and angry, mainly in his speeches, and for millions of Americans, he managed to raise the questions and the doubts and to underline the disillusion that lots of us feel about how we wage our political campaigns, Dan.
Mike Wallace from the Middle East, interview with Yasser Arafat right here to our election night coverage. Maine has gone for Gore, 4 electoral votes up in Maine. This is a state that the Bush forces thought they might take. It is not to be. As we mentioned earlier, the Bush family has deep roots in Connecticut, where George Bush was actually born, in Maine, where they have a summer home, and in Texas, of course. Maine has gone for Al Gore. Also, New Jersey Senate, big race there. John Corzine has won a Democratic seat in New Jersey. This is a hold on for the Democrats. Mark this man spent an estimated $80 million. No, you did not hear. $80 million. He spent money like he had shorted Microsoft and won this race. We don't know the figures yet, but Corzine has won the New Jersey Senate race. Ed Bradley, let's get back to the presidential race where things are so close, 130 to 122, Bush over Gore right now. While Al Gore is competitive with George Bush, what about Tennessee?
Well, there's a big shadow in Tennessee, and the shadow's name is Bill Clinton. If you take a look at how people felt about Bill Clinton in Tennessee, you'll find that almost 60% of the voters said that they had an unfavorable attitude towards Bill Clinton, and of those voters, 74% of them voted for George Bush. And also, you hear so much about this being the vice president's home state. about 2/3 of all the voters said it was not important that Gore was from Tennessee. Dan, I think people feel that when it comes to a number of issues in Tennessee and perhaps some other states, issues like guns, tobacco, and the environment, they feel that the vice president has moved left of where they are.
What a heartbreak for Al Gore if it turns out that Tennessee is the state that keeps him from the presidency, and what a whoop for the Republicans it'll be if Tennessee turns out to be the state that keeps Gore out of the White House. Let's give you another quick look at the Electoral College map right now. This is the way it looks. 130 electoral votes for George Bush, 122 for Al Gore. It breaks down this way. Florida has gone for Gore. Illinois has gone for him. Michigan with 19 electoral votes has gone for him. New Jersey with 15 has dropped for him. Maine with 4 has just gone for him. All the states in blue belong to Al Gore. Now, there are far fewer than the states in red that have gone for George Bush. Bush is sweeping through the South like a tornado through a trailer park, and that includes the southern border state of Kentucky where the light is flashing. That's the only state so far that went for Clinton Gore in 1996 that has definitely gone tonight for Bush in Kentucky. But the big states out there where the votes, where the polls have closed, but the decisions are unknown, the two biggest ones, Pennsylvania with 23 electoral votes and Ohio with 21. West Virginia has 5 and is still out there. Two states with 11 electoral votes, that would be Missouri and Tennessee. Most of the polls have closed in Missouri. All the polls have closed in Tennessee. Arkansas, the polls have just closed. No decision there yet either. If you want two to watch, Bob Schieffer, help me out here. Wisconsin with 11 electoral votes and Minnesota with 10 electoral votes are looming large, and one reason is?
Ralph Nader is there, but we also have to keep our eye on Missouri, Dan, because holding those polls open for another 3 hours, most of the Democratic vote in Missouri is in St. Louis and Kansas City. That's where the polls are being held open, in St. Louis. So this takes on added importance, I think, the fact that these polls are still open.
And Leslie Stahl, Washington State and Oregon State out west, as we said before, we keep coming back to it, this is considered strong Nader country and has to give the Gore people the knee wobbles.
And if this race is close, those voters, a lot of them are voting by ballot. We could be waiting for a day or two to find out the outcome, if it's as close as it seems to be at this point.
Electoral vote count at this hour. Bush, who's led from the opening tap, 130. Gore has come back strong in the last hour and a half, has 122. All the states in red belong to Bush. The ones in blue belong to Gore. The ones in white, the polls have closed, but no decision yet. In all the states, including New York, with 33 big electoral votes, all the states in gray are where the polls are still open. And you, if you are eligible to vote in that state, still have an opportunity to get the polls and vote. Our CBS News election night coverage will continue after these messages. Stick in here with us. CBS News election headquarters in New York. With 270 electoral votes needed to win, Bush has 130, Gore has 122. Big states hanging out there include Ohio with 21 electoral votes and Pennsylvania with 23. Joining us now is the distinguished governor of Pennsylvania, Tom Ridge. He's in Harrisburg, the capital. Good evening, Governor.
Good evening,
what are you
Dan.
looking
nice
for to tell us how Pennsylvania is going to go? You must be right on the edge of your seat about this.
Well, we are. I mean, I've said all along it's going to be probably one of the most closely watched, obviously, and closely contested elections in the state. One of the challenges we always have for a Republican to win statewide, Dan, is that the Democrats have a wonderful machine in Philadelphia, and they crank out the vote, and they rack up huge, huge numbers. And we have to do our best in the other 66 counties. And so far, it would suggest to us, with record turnouts in traditional Republican counties, that we'll be able to offset this. But I think, while you may want to make a prediction when there's 20 or 30% of the vote in, you might want to wait until there's about 99.9% of the vote in Pennsylvania.
Governor, you didn't just tumble off the turnip track. You've been around politics for a long while. Seniors going for Gore in Florida said in exit polling that they were scared by Governor Bush. Why would they be scared? Social Security, you think? Was that the total sum of it?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that the play that the Democrats use every 2 years, particularly when things are looking a little bleak. That's the medic scare and the Social Security scare does have some political traction. We've tried to offset it in Pennsylvania. I mean, the challenge we have is next to Florida, we have the second largest number of seniors, and we had to run some counter commercials ourselves. I did one on the radio to try to counterbalance, but that's a pretty effective commercial. I thought it was somewhat shameless, but the fact of the matter is it does have some political traction. We have to figure out ways to overcome it.
Governor, have to say goodbye, but I'm going to ask you one more time. Governor, have to say goodbye, but I'm going to ask you one more time. If you had to pick it, would you say Pennsylvania winds up in George Bush's column?
Yes, put the W under W.
Can't do it officially yet. Thanks for your time, and we'll see how it comes out. See you along the trail. Right. Thank you very much. Tom Ridge of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania's 23 electoral votes could be decisive. Here's one way to look at it. Still hard to see, maybe impossible, for Al Gore to win the presidency without carrying California. He's got to do a lot more than that, but certainly he's got to have California. Things have not yet reached the stage where George Bush can't win it without carrying Pennsylvania. But it certainly would be quite handy, to say the least, for George Bush to pick up Pennsylvania's 23 electoral votes. And you can bet the rent money that down in Austin, they're watching Pennsylvania very carefully, those 23 votes. Now, Ed Bradley, Ohio's still out there with 21 electoral college votes, been out there for a long time. Why?
Polls closed an hour and 15 minutes ago in Ohio, and the reason that it's so close is that the vice president is doing very well among union households in Ohio. It's a big union state. But Governor Bush is doing very well among men, a huge lead among men, and that state seems to be leaning in his direction now, but it's still too close to call.
Maybe Ohio will be decided, as many other states, by women in the suburbs. We'll see. Leslie Stahl, you've been watching these important governor races. Bring us up to date quickly on them.
Well, Dan, there are 11 races for governor tonight. 4 Democrats have won so far. In North Carolina, the Attorney General, Mike Easley, has held the governor's chair for the Democrats. Bush won the state. Easley ran away from Gore when he was campaigning in Indiana. Another state Bush won. He won it easily. The Democratic governor, the incumbent 70-year-old Frank O'Bannon, has won re-election also easily. In Delaware, the Democrat, Ruth Ann Minner, the lieutenant governor, won the governor's chair with more than 2/3 of the women's vote. She lost the men's vote by 6 points, creating a huge 22-point gender gap. In New Hampshire, another woman has won, the incumbent Democrat, Jean Shaheen, a big Gore supporter. She has beaten the former senator, Republican Senator Gordon Humphrey. She refused to take the tax pledge and still won in taxophobic New Hampshire. Dan, women running in 5 of the 11 races for governor tonight.
And we'll keep up to date on that. Also, the battle for control of the House of Representatives. Too early to tell very much about that, but just want to remind our viewers, we're also watching that as well as the outcome of the Senate, who gets to control the Senate. Looks like the Republicans may hold on to control of the Senate, but too early to say that definitively. In the presidential race, this is the way it looks. 130 electoral votes for Bush. He's led from the get-go, but Gore has been gaining on him. Gore now has 122. It takes 270 to win. All the states in red belong to Bush. That includes Kentucky, where the light is flashing, tells you that's the only state so far. Pennsylvania goes for Gore. This is CBS News. Pennsylvania drops for Gore. 23 electoral votes, and for the first time tonight, mark it if you will. If you're in the kitchen, Mabel, come back in the front room. 145 for Gore, 130 for Bush. 270 needed to win. Doesn't mean this is over, not by a long shot. But they'll be doing backflips in Nashville because Gore almost positively had to have Pennsylvania. Remember, we told you when the night started, 3 to watch: Florida, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. The reason they were 3 to watch, Michigan with 19 electoral votes, Pennsylvania with 23, and Florida with 25. Ohio with 21 electoral votes now looms large for George Bush. Won't say he absolutely positively gotta have it, but who would he like to have it now since Pennsylvania has dropped for Al Gore? It couldn't be much hotter. The pendulum is swung toward Gore for the moment, but it's swinging back and forth. Our CBS News election coverage will continue in a moment after we get our breath from all this excitement.
the latest national and local election results that affect you the most. Log on to CBS.com.
Back at CBS News election headquarters in New York, Governor George Bush galloped out to an early lead in the electoral vote count with 270 to win. But now he's stopped to breathe his pony. He has 130 electoral votes. Al Gore, by winning Pennsylvania by our CBS News estimate, 23 big electoral votes fall on his column. This is the way the electoral map looks at the moment. Note up here, 23 electoral votes in Pennsylvania fall into Gore's column. Ed Bradley, what did it for Gore in Pennsylvania?
I think the people who made up their minds in the last week of the campaign, about almost 20% made up their minds in the last week of the campaign, and half of those went for Al Gore, only 41% to Bush. Nader and Buchanan got some others. Gore closed very well in Pennsylvania. Also, union households make up 30% of the vote. Gore got almost 60% of those votes in Pennsylvania.
Leslie Stahl, some news on the House race. Don't have only a few seconds. What do you got?
Silver lining for the Democrats in the national poll for House. They're up 2%. It's 50% for the Dems, 48% for the Republicans.
Well, remember, we have a long way to go in these House races, but things looking good for the Democratic side at this hour. But it's all still out there. It's still on the table. 130 electoral votes for Bush, 145 with Gore, now that Gore has won Pennsylvania. Dan Rather at CBS News election headquarters in New York. New York goes for Gore. Hillary Clinton wins the Senate seat in New York are among our CBS News election night headlines of this hour. For the first time tonight, Gore's back big time with big wins in big states. Mark them: Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Florida, and now New York with 33 electoral votes. And First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton will be moving from the White House to a U.S. Senate seat from New York. It's 9 p.m. in the East, and this is the all-important electoral vote count at this hour. Again, it takes 270 to win. Here is the nationwide popular vote count at this moment. Battleground states Pennsylvania, Missouri, and Wisconsin still hanging out there. Check that. Pennsylvania is no longer hanging out there. That's my era. Pennsylvania has gone in the Gore column, but Wisconsin and Minnesota, Missouri, Arkansas, Tennessee, West Virginia, Ohio, and New Hampshire are all hanging out there. All told, the polls are now closed in 40 states, including the 12 states just closed, worth 102 electoral votes. So in declining order of their electoral importance, here they are. New York, 33 electoral votes. They were expected to go for Al Gore. They went for Gore. Not only did Gore win, but he won large enough to help pull Hillary Clinton through to a win in the Senate race. Louisiana, the Pelican State, goes 9 electoral votes for Bush. Widely expected outcome there, but appreciated by the Bush forces given the closeness of the race. In Nebraska, as the race now moves to the plains and the Midwest, strong Republican state, 5 electoral votes go to Bush from Nebraska. In Rhode Island, 4 electoral votes. Little Rhodey goes for Gore. North Dakota, 3 electoral votes from the Flicker-tail state. More about that later, why they call it that, but the Flicker-tail state flicks for Bush. South Dakota does the same, 3 electoral votes. So Bush gets 6 electoral votes in the Dakotas. Wyoming, 3 electoral votes. The home state, one of the home states of Dick Cheney, goes 3 electoral votes for Bush. Now, the polls just closed in these next states, but the races are too close to call. And look at this list. It's too early to say that the election will be decided by these votes, but Wisconsin with 11, Minnesota with 10 now loom large for both candidates because the electoral vote is so close, 182 for Gore, 153 for Bush. Arizona with 8 hasn't been called yet, although the polls have closed there. Colorado with another 8, expected to go for Bush, but too close to call at the moment. New Mexico with 5. The weather was bad in there today. Don't know whether that affected turnout, and if so, how much. But these are all states where the polls have just closed, but we don't have enough information to say how they're going to go. And now, once again, to the national map. The states in red have gone to Bush. The states in blue have gone to Gore. You may remember, and those of you just joining us, Gore got Florida. That put him in the hunt early. He absolutely, positively had to have Florida. He got it. Doesn't mean Gore's going to win, but since he's won Florida with 25 electoral votes, won Pennsylvania with 23, also picked up Michigan and Illinois having 22. Ohio with 21 electoral votes is the biggest state on the board now where the polls have closed and no decision has been made. But Wisconsin with 11, Minnesota with 10, all of these states now could figure large in the outcome. Missouri with 11. The polls open in the St. Louis area under a judge's order because so many people were lined up at regular poll closing time. Arkansas, President Clinton's home state, up for grabs, and a heartbreaker for Al Gore if it goes toward Bush, and the Bush people are practically celebrating because they think they're going to win Tennessee, and the Bush people, along with some others, think Tennessee could be the margin one way or the other. But right now the polls have closed in Tennessee, and it's still considered a mite too close to call. Now, New Mexico, Colorado, and Arizona all...
Press and Novak talk about the new administration on Crossfire tomorrow.
From CNN Center in Atlanta, coverage of Election 2000 continues. Here again, Judy Woodruff, Bernard Shaw, Jeff Greenfield, and Bill Schneider.
Stomachs are tight, palms are moist, and people are walking the floor across the United States of America still in search for a winner of the White House. Right now, Texas Governor George Bush has a 4 electoral vote lead. He has 246 to Vice President Gore's 242. 4 states undecided. Outstanding. Here they are. Well, first, here they are. Florida, Iowa, Oregon, Wisconsin, with the electoral votes you see. In the upper right-hand corner of your screen, Governor Bush has 246, as we say. His key to the White House, only 24 more electoral votes. On the left side at the top, Vice President Gore with 242 electoral votes. His key to the White House, just 28 more electoral votes.
And here's the reasons we're all biting our fingernails down to the nubs. Here are the numbers. This is the raw vote with 77% of the precincts reporting across the United States. George W. Bush has 49% of the vote, 39.7 million votes to Al Gore's 48%, 39 million votes plus some. Now let's look at the raw votes in those 4 states that Bernie mentioned. In the state of Florida, with 91% of the precincts reporting George W. Bush at 50%, Al Gore 48%.
To 65,000
65,000 separation. Ralph Nader, 2%, 84,000 votes, and you can see a few votes there for Pat Buchanan and John Hagelin with the Natural Law Party.
That means Nader's vote is bigger than the margin by which Bush is leading Gore. If you assign most of Nader's votes to Gore, you probably get an absolute dead heat in Florida.
Right. Moving on to the state of Wisconsin, with 76% of the precincts reporting. You don't get a whole lot closer than this. Al Gore, 48%, a little over 1 million votes. George W. Bush, 48%, a little under 1 million votes.
5,000 vote margin. Look at Nader's vote.
And there, Ralph Nader is clearly a factor, I think you have to say. 4% of the vote, 77,000 to a few thousand, give or take, for Pat Buchanan, and 630 for John Hagelin. In the state of Iowa, 93% of the precincts reporting Al Gore ahead, with 49% to George W. Bush's 48%. Look how close. What is it? 8,500 votes approximately.
And look at Nader's
Nader's got 5 times that many.
Yeah.
Oh, no, 3 times that many.
25,000 votes, 2%.
Point is, you talk about the Nader factor. When we come down to these states,
that's right.
What you can see is that in these states, without Nader, it's highly likely Gore gets them all.
And in the state of Oregon, the last one we're going to look at here, 54% of the precincts reporting. This is the state where you could only vote by mail. You could not go to a polling place today. You had to vote by mail or deliver your ballot today. George W. Bush, 49% with 411,000 to Al Gore's 46%, 388,000. What is that, a separation of 22,000 votes? And Ralph Nader has more than the spread there, 4%, 34, almost 35,000 votes.
And these are mailed-in ballots that had to be in before Election Day.
Yeah. One point. Very rarely does a third-party candidate have anything like this impact in a race. The people who talk about Perot in '92 costing Bush the White House, the Perot vote split, as our exit poll showed, almost dead even between Clinton and Bush. In this case, with Ralph Nader pulling nationally under 5% of the vote, he clearly has the potential to cost Al Gore the White House, which no third-party candidate, as far as I can tell, has ever done.
And it's important that it is not because Ralph Nader is doing spectacularly well. He is not. He probably won't get the 5% nationally he needs to qualify for federal subsidies. He won't even make 5%. He's doing that because the race is so excruciatingly close between Gore and Bush.
Ralph Nader has said throughout this campaign it doesn't matter to him if he costs Al Gore the election. I mean, his argument is there's not a dime's worth of difference between these two parties. Clearly, Al Gore and a lot of Democrats disagree with that, but that is his contention.
Consider just one other thing. At the start of this race, we all thought Florida was securely in Bush's camp. We all thought the Dukakis states were clearly in Gore's camp. Neither of those things have been true, and that's why we're here at 1 o'clock in the morning wondering who the president's going to be.
Yeah.
All right.
Think about what must be going through the minds of the candidates. How'd you like to be, George Bush or Al Gore?
Or Al Gore at this hour. And speaking of the candidates, let's go now to our correspondents who know these candidates as well as anybody we know. Candy Crowley is in Austin, Texas. John King in Nashville, Tennessee. Candy, what are they thinking? What are they saying there?
Well, not only is it interesting to think about what the candidates are thinking about, but how would you like to be Jeb Bush, governor of Florida, who is sitting next to his brother as they are waiting for the outcome down there, which obviously can be quite critical. I wanted to put a couple of scheduling words into the mix right now. When you look at 3 of those 4 states that are currently undecided, Florida, George Bush spent 24 of the last 48 campaign hours in Florida. He was there all Sunday. Wisconsin and Iowa. George Bush was in both states yesterday. Certainly the strategist is looking pretty smart right now as this race comes down to 4 states, 3 of which Bush has visited in the last 48 hours. Judy?
John King, when it comes to strategy, are the Gore people feeling they did the right thing?
Well, they certainly feel they did the right thing in the last 48 hours. The vice president, as Governor Bush, visiting those states now down to the wire. They're looking at Florida. If you look at the math, these other states obviously still in play, Wisconsin and the like, but the vice president can only win this election unless some state turns around. The vice president can only win this election if he wins Florida. We're told, he's been told tonight, that the outstanding precincts tend to be Democratic, but he has a lot of ground to be made up. And if you make calls into the Gore campaign, ask them about the Nader factor. The words you get back are words we would not repeat on television. Very upset inside the Gore campaign about Ralph Nader's candidacy. But again, this all comes down to the state of Florida now. They're telling the vice president they believe he can make up the gap. As the tallies come in, he is closing it slightly, but that's it. The vice president, they're watching Florida. That will decide whether he gets to move up from vice president to president.
John, we're hearing a little bit of an echo because they're watching you on the screen right behind you. We're seeing 2 John Kings in the picture here. 2 is better than 1.
Bill Snyder, you said you wanted to emphasize something, and it runs standing to what John was saying about William Daley, his campaign manager, said you've got to win Florida to win this thing tonight.
Let's get down to where this really stands. Al Gore cannot win with just Florida. He needs Florida and 1 additional state. Any one of those 3 other states, Florida plus. George Bush can just barely win with 271 electoral votes if he carries Florida. If he does not carry Florida, he's got to carry all 3 of the other states in order to win this election.
He can do it without Florida, which is the difference. Al Gore must have Florida.
Al Gore must have Florida, but if Al Gore does carry Florida, then George Bush to win has to carry every one of those other states, Iowa, Oregon, and Wisconsin. That's what it comes down to.
But one piece of good news, there cannot be a tie.
That's right.
I mean, it cannot end now. There's no way to divide the remaining states for 269, 269. There are many ways to divide it so that the winner has 271 and the loser has 267.
What you're saying is there will be an end to this.
Yeah, but you should see the smile on Hal Bruno's face when you just said, Jeff, when you just said there cannot be a tie. Hal Bruno just smiled, and he's smiling again.
I'm wondering, is John King still with us? John and Candy, are they still with us, or have we
No, they're still
said
with
goodbye? John, you said you couldn't repeat what the Gore people...
We remain.
Candy, if I can turn around and come to you on this whole Nader business. To what extent have the Bush people factored that in to their thinking?
Well, look, they're looking at the same polls that we are, and they knew all along that Ralph Nader would be a factor in some of those places. It made Bush competitive. It kept him competitive. I don't think in the long run, if this ends up to be a Bush win, that they're going to argue with what Nader did or didn't do. A win is a win is a win.
And John King, when you said you couldn't repeat what some of the Gore people were saying about Ralph Nader, how hard did they try? Because we know there were some efforts made to persuade Ralph Nader to pull back and you know, drop his challenge.
Well, it was a very late effort, Judy. There was an effort over the internet. There were petitions circulated to major Nader supporters from key Democrats, mostly from the Judy. There was an effort over the internet. There were petitions circulated to major Nader supporters from key Democrats, mostly from the liberal community, the consumer advocacy community, but they failed in that effort. And some Democrats also privately saying tonight, and one publicly, Ed Rendell, the general chairman of the Democratic National Committee, they're not just pointing fingers at Nader, they're pointing fingers directly at the Gore strategy. Mr. Rendell telling us earlier he thinks they should not have pulled out of Ohio so early. And look at the 6 electoral votes in Arkansas. If the vice president had won those, he could win the White House by winning the other 3 outstanding states, not Florida. President Clinton went to his home state only once to campaign on Sunday. That was because the Gore campaign controlled his schedule. The sharp criticism from Mr. Rendell tonight that they should have let the president out of the box much earlier, especially in Arkansas and perhaps elsewhere.
Well, Clinton actually tried to not to, so subtly indicate to Gore. You remember, John, a few days ago when people were saying to Clinton, visiting him, you know, you really should be out there. And Clinton said, tell Gore, tell Gore.
Well, Bernie, the Gore research did show, and other Democratic pollsters would agree with this, that the president could be hurtful in some areas of the country. But what Mr. Rendell was saying tonight, just in the case of Arkansas, look at those 6 electoral votes. If we could have won those. His other criticism was in Ohio. That criticism echoed by some leaders of organized labor. They believe they had a pretty good operation in Ohio, but the Gore campaign in the final week went from $1 million a week on television to $200,000 a week on television. They left themselves no room for error. That is the criticism some Democrats hearing tonight. They left themselves no room for error at all. So when they lost here in Tennessee and then the president's home state of Arkansas, now they have to win Florida. And of course, they're losing right now.
All right, John King in Nashville, Candy Crowley in Austin. It is early in the morning, 1:15 Eastern time. I guess it's 12:15 there in Texas, in Austin, Texas. We are watching an extraordinary presidential election unfold. We're going to take a break. When we come back, among other things, we're going to hear from the Capitol gang. Stay with us. It's a presidential race that is hat-band tight, as somebody said. We are going to the Capitol gang right now for some analysis and insight, and we're going to start with Al Hunt in Washington.
Thank you, Judy. None of us have hats on, but I'm here with Bob Novak and Cato Byrne. Robert, coming down to Florida, Palm Beach, Broward, Dade County.
This is just an amazing thing that we're picking what we used to call the leader of the free world. We still call him the leader of the free world, I think. President of the United States, very important office. These votes were cast, the polls closed in Florida 6 hours ago. This is the year 2000, not the year 1932, and we're still counting them. And it's this agonizing process of deciding whether Vice President Gore, in these closing hours of this contest, and they voted a long time ago, there's nothing going on, is whether they can bridge the gap. It's now, what, 50,000 votes between them? And I've been trying to do projections, not very good at math. I think it comes very, very close, but probably no cigar. Of course, just to repeat, if George Bush wins Florida, he's elected president. If Al Gore wins it, he probably wins it, because I think he'll probably win the other state necessary to get over the top.
Kate, if George Bush does win it, either that combination of the 3 states or winning Florida, CNN has already projected the Republicans will control the House. If they win one of those remaining 3 Senate seats, they'll control the Senate. That would be a sweep. That'd get everything, but it'd be a pretty lame sweep, wouldn't it?
It'd be a very big sweep, Al. let me just notice the irony. In a long night, the first returns we know are House Republicans held on to the House. The nasty, unpopular House Republicans who impeached the president. The people who have said, where are you, who were persona non grata in Philadelphia, who was supposed to be such a drag on the Republicans. And the first thing we know tonight is that the House Republicans held on. Right. And the Senate is still in some doubt. Al, as you know, Republicans, it appears, have lost 2 seats. They could lose a couple of more. So
everything is close. Everything
it's just
moves,
unbelievable. Yes.
Everything that moves is close out there. You know, I have one thought about Ralph Nader. It's only the second worst scenario for Democrats, because even though he's probably going to cost, or he may well cost Al Gore several states, the worst nightmare of Democrats was that he would do that and get 5% of the vote, which would make him a permanent fixture, at least eligible for federal money in 4 years. It appears, Bob, he's not going to get that 4%.
It's another great victory for the 2-party system, right. I would believe. And our old colleague Pat Buchanan really had almost a humiliating election. I want to go back to what Kate was talking about, the House staying Republican. You know, in this town, in Washington, it has been a matter of holy writ for about a year that the Democrats were going to regain control of the House this year. Now, they may in 2002, but who knows what lies ahead. But this was holy writ, and the lobbyists were pouring money into the Democratic coffers. Charlie Rangel was measuring the drapes to be chairman of the Ways and Means Committee.
And the ropes.
Pardon?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, and Speaker Gephardt, that's what they called him, Speaker Gephardt, in the cloakroom. This is really a blow. As we sit here, we don't know who's going to control the Senate, but the Democrats never really thought they were going to control it.
And Bob, the House Republicans deserve credit. Dick Gephardt really got his members to sit tight. The Republicans were defending many more seats, and they played it really smart. They played local elections. They had their members do what they had to do locally to win. I mean, it's a win they fought for, and they deserve credit.
They loaded up with pork, with highway dams, everything.
You know what
the big spending Republicans, and it worked.
Well, they turned the tables. I mean, it is very difficult to knock off incumbent members of a majority party, as the Republicans learned over 40 years, and that's something Dick Gephardt's appreciating. He won't have this kind of luck, though, between now and 2002, keeping his members where they are. There'll be some retirements now.
I think we'll find that at most there's 7 or 8 incumbents that lost tonight. So once again, the system is an Incumbents Protection Act for both parties in the House.
You know, in the Senate, why is it that the Republicans in the Senate had such a hard time keeping their seats, particularly on a percentage basis? A lot of them were not very attractive candidates that lost now. Senator Roth, a fine gentleman, really shouldn't have won. His time in Delaware, his time had come. And I think particularly in the Senate, the personality of the person is much more important than it is in the House.
Well, personality, Bob, we'll wrap up for the night. We'll go back to Judy Woodruff in Atlanta with more on this nail biter.
All right, it is a nail biter. We're all still sitting on the edge of our seats, such as they are at this hour. We've been here for, 8 hours and counting, and we're not leaving until we know who the next president's going to be. Much more to come.
What if we don't know?
Bernie's wondering, what do we do if we don't know?
Bring us food.
We'll be here. We're going to take a break. We'll come back.
The American people, indeed people around the world, are watching a historic, unprecedented fight in a number of ways. A fight for control of the White House. Vice President Al Gore and Governor George Bush are locked in battle right now. Taking you to our electoral vote map. At this hour, Governor Bush 4 electoral votes ahead of the Vice President. Bush 246, Gore 242. Florida, a state too close to call at this hour, is one of 4 states still outstanding. Here they are. Florida, 25 electoral votes. Iowa has 7, as does Oregon. Wisconsin, 11. look in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. The governor has 246 electoral votes. He only needs 24 to go to the White House. On the left side up there, Gore, 242 electoral votes. His key to the White House, 28 electoral votes. Now, we mentioned Florida is too close to call. This is the raw vote. Look at this, with 94% of the precincts reporting in the Sunshine State. Governor Bush with 49%, or 2.6 million votes, to the Vice President's 49% and 2.6 million votes. Ralph Nader, 2% of the vote. Pat Buchanan and Hagelin, but Nader the factor there, as we've been noting all this evening. Pat Buchanan and Hagelin, but Nader the factor there, as we've been noting all this evening. In Washington, Mary Madeline, Mike McCurry, what are you thinking now? Mary.
Let's go home. We're thinking we're going to send you some of our cold pizza. Would that make you feel better?
No.
Look. Let me say something. Since we're sitting here and we obviously are killing time because we don't know what the result is going to be at this point, that there is one thing that you can definitely say about either Bush or Gore. They are going to inherit a very divided federal government, a very divided electorate, a Congress that is split right down the middle between Democrat and Republican. And what are they going to do the day after tomorrow when one of them is elected president? I think that's the question we ought to start asking now. Now, the only thing clear about this election at this point is the agenda. Because both of these candidates and many members of the new Congress ran on basically the same agenda. They're going to have to do something to preserve Social Security. They're going to have to do something about prescription drugs, especially for the seniors who are on the Medicare program. They're going to have to think about how we improve education in this country, and they're going to think about how do we extend the benefits of a prosperous economy to more people. That's the agenda, and that's the only thing that's settled now. The differences between Bush and Gore on those were frankly at the margin, because they both basically are centrists running from the center of the political spectrum. So we are now left with a very, very divided government and no choice yet of who our next president is going to be. But one thing certain, what the American people want this new crew to work on. The question is, will they be able to work together to get some things done?
Let me disagree slightly with my esteemed and sleepy colleague here. There was a movement for the kind of market-based solutions in Medicare and Social Security that Bush put on the table before there was a campaign. There were bipartisan commissions with which this president kiboshed because he wanted the issue. Those were not things that Gore ran on. They were very different solutions. Gore's were all government-based. Bush's were all market-based. There was no opposition evident in the exit polls for that type of solution. In fact, in Florida, the very state we're waiting to come in for now, which we thought was going to be won or lost over Social Security, there was a support from seniors for Governor, soon-to-be President Bush, in my opinion. So I don't feel as negative about where the government action is going to go, despite these slim margins, because there was an effort afoot, a bipartisan effort afoot for market-based solutions, particularly on Medicare and Social Security. Also, you'll note in all the exit polls, the second issue cited for support of Governor Bush was the tax relief or tax code reform. So I think Bush will be there. This was not a status quo vote, despite the evenness or the equalness in the vote outcome.
Let me suggest to both of you an idea, and either one of you or both can rip it apart if you would like. And that is, if you're trying to read anything into this election, and by the way, based on the raw vote numbers, it doesn't look like turnout has gone up much at all, if at all, that maybe one of the things that's being said by this incredibly close election is a plague on both your houses. Enough with talking points, enough with people coming on television and spinning the line of the day, enough with characterizations of the opposition that don't bear that much relationship to the truth. What do you think? Michael, go ahead.
Yes. Jeff, I think that is right. There's a lot of wisdom in something our friend Ron Brownstein pointed out a long time ago. I think that this election was about the American people saying they like the way things are going in this country. It's one of the reasons why they approve of the performance of Bill Clinton in office as president. But they want things to change here in Washington. They want people to work together. And at the end of the day, that may have been the thing that helps push Governor Bush over the top, because his message was more aimed at bringing people together to do the business of the country, Democrat and Republican together. Now, he is going to be put severely to the test. His very first assignment, if he ends up winning Florida and winning the presidency, is going to be to put the strong people in his party in the Congress, like DeLay and Army, in a box and tell them that they have to learn how to get along with their neighbors across the aisle. That's going to be very, very hard to do. But I think you may be onto something there, that what the message of this election might be is the country is fine, we're going along well, we appreciate the performance we've had, but we now really need to get down to business in Washington and start solving some problems.
Yeah, Mary, the way I want to phrase it, and just get your reaction to it, is that the thing that Americans see about politics every night on the cable news networks and in the Congress, the kind of what George Bush the father called this bickering, is something that drives people crazy independent of ideology. And I don't know whether or not you think that's right, and if it is, whether Washington can break the habit like you have to break a drug habit sometimes.
Well, and we bear some responsibility of that because there's a chicken or an egg thing going on here. They know if they say things in an acrimonious or provocative way that they're more likely to be covered. But I do think Bush was onto something when he said, look, we just got to break this habit. We who have been here for a long time, you know, we're kind of like, I don't in any way mean to make this a frivolous comparison, but we're kind of like the Mideast. You know, we just have these inescapable reactions to each other, which I think this whole new crew coming in will be able to change. Changing the tone requires bringing new people in with it who don't have these kind of old grudges, and I think that'll work. And I really believe this, having been here for 20 years. People who come to Washington, public servants it's a noble profession, and they make a lot of sacrifices. They want to serve the public. They don't want to behave like this anymore. They want to get their job done. They come with ideas and idealism, and I think on both sides of the aisles, they'll be looking forward to working together. I really believe that. Either I believe that or I'm really tired.
Well, one thing is really true is that nobody is going to be elected with much of a mandate. Neither Vice President Bush, or Vice President Gore if he's elected, or Governor Bush, or the Congress, which is split down the middle. They're going to have to work together to fulfill the wishes of the American people.
I'm curious. I know when you're not on CNN, you're on the telephones at this late hour. What are you hearing?
We're hearing the same thing that we've had guests on CNN and elsewhere say tonight, that they are, you know, both campaigns, I think, desperately watching those returns from those final states that are out there with no better idea than we have here right now what's going to happen. Long ago in the evening, their models, their projections, their turnout variances that they were measuring all went by the wayside, because it's now down to those handful of votes in some of these places that are still undecided.
But Bernie, I will tell you specifically in the outstanding states, Jeb's people, Governor Jeb Bush's people really feel confident, as they have all night, about what's left out in Florida coming home for the other Governor Bush. The field director feels, and was saying in the middle of my conversation about, look, if CNN is saying there's a 20,000 vote disparity in Wisconsin, she said, hang on, and you know, the next time you came up, there was a 2,000 vote disparity. So they're feeling good about Oregon, Wisconsin, and still confident about Florida.
Mary Madeline, your bet awaits you, as does yours. Mike McCurry, we thank you for being such real stallions tonight in our coverage of this fascinating story.
We hope you get released soon, too.
You're not the only one hoping that. Judy.
Well, we hope that you're not abandoning us. Does this mean Mike and Mary are leaving us?
Yeah, they're going to bed.
Yes.
Uh-oh. Can't we persuade you to hang around a few more minutes? Thank you both. Fascinating. Let's take, we're talking about numbers. Let's take another look at the raw vote numbers in the state of Florida, with 95% of the precincts reporting 49% to 49%. I think Mary just referred to this. It's a 20,000, no, I think she was talking about Wisconsin, but this is a 20,000 vote separation among over more than 5 million votes cast. We're going to go directly to St. Louis, Missouri, to the man who would like to have been Speaker of the House of Representatives. Let's listen.
All of the people here and some not here who helped me win this campaign. I want to thank every worker. I want to especially thank Joyce Abusi, who's the best political director in the entire world. And I want to thank every one of you who helped me, who went door to door with us, who helped us make telephone calls, who took us to the picnics, who helped us talk to the people about the issues that matter to the people in this district. And I will work every day to help the people of the 3rd District of Missouri.
Dick Gephardt, the minority leader of the House of Representatives, re-elected to another term in the U.S. Congress, 2-year term. As I mentioned a moment ago, he would have liked to have been have an additional title there to be Speaker of the House, but as CNN is projecting, we've said this earlier, we think the House will remain in Republican control. We are going to look again at those numbers coming in from the state of Florida. We are going to look again at those numbers coming in from the state of Florida, and to help us do it, we're going over to that map and to Hal Bruno. Hal, what is left to come in?
Judy, the lead has been cut down to about 20,000, Bush over Gore in Florida. And what is outstanding is basically Democratic territory along the Gold Coast. Let's look at the map here. All right, it's this area here from Miami up to West Palm Beach. Now, 26% of what's outstanding is from Broward County, and that's heavily Jewish and that's heavily Democratic. 45% is from Dade County. Now, Dade County splits 2 ways. Part of it is African American, which is Democratic. Part of it is Cuban American, which is Republican. We don't know which part of it is still outstanding. But the thing is, Florida has gotten so close now that there's just absolutely no way of counting it until probably every last vote is in.
We did hear Mary Madeline say, and then earlier tonight, Carl, we've heard other folks who represent the Bush campaign say that they are still optimistic, that they think there are either enough absentee votes, enough of a Republican presence in those areas to give the state to George W. Bush.
Yeah, they've got 2 reasons to be optimistic. One is it could be some of that outstanding vote is from the districts that are Cuban American, which is Republican, and a lot of it could be absentee, which tends to be Republican. On the other hand, Gore's got some reason for optimism too, because some of what's outstanding is from very solid Democratic territory.
And tell us again, Hal, how long may it be before we know the answer to how Florida goes?
1 hour, 14 minutes, and 20 seconds. Judy, I don't have the slightest idea how long it's going to be.
Hope springs eternal, Hal. All right, we said there are 4 states out. We've said it over and over again. It is the state of Florida with the 25 votes. That is the crucial state. And there is Iowa, Wisconsin, and Oregon. And Bill Schneider, you've been looking at some exit polls.
Well, we've looked at some exit polls in Florida. And what we find in Florida is that Jewish voters are about 80% Democratic. Blacks are about 90% Democratic. You know, Hal mentioned the Cuban American vote. People think that most Hispanic voters in Florida are Cuban Americans. In fact, a lot of them are not. The Hispanic vote in Florida in our exit poll is breaking just about 50-50 for Bush and Gore, which has got to be good news for Gore because Bush is probably counting on a heavy Cuban American vote, which is historically Republican. But a lot of Hispanic women, particularly in Florida, have been voting Democratic in recent elections. So it looks like the Hispanic vote is not as reliably Republican as it used to be in Florida.
This Hispanic vote in Florida, we've learned, is a vote. These are people who have come from other parts of Latin and South America, people from Central America, South America.
That's right.
We also know that the Cuban second and third generation vote is not as Republican
That's
as
right.
the older.
Now, the guessing was that the Elian Gonzalez issue might have driven a lot of Cuban Americans back to the Republican Party because they split pretty closely between Clinton and Dole last time. But it appears that the Hispanic vote in Florida, which is concentrated in South Florida, where Hal said the vote is still out, that vote is splitting a lot closer than people expected it to.
I would just make one other point, that this, for some of us, this is very reminiscent of 1976. There was no question that Carter had won the popular vote, but it was in the middle of the night or in early morning when the votes from Mississippi and Ohio came in, both states in a matter of a few thousand votes, that put Jimmy Carter into the White House. So when Judy plaintively asks, when will we know, history may not be kind to your hopes for an end to this.
I have some information. The Florida election authorities report that it is likely that close to 1 million absentee ballots were sent out statewide in Florida. Almost all of them, including the absentee ballots, will be counted by 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, including the overseas ballots, military and non-military, that were received by Election Day. 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, they say almost all of them will be counted.
And it's just 1:45 Eastern time, so we may only have an hour and 45 minutes to go.
Well, one man who won't go to sleep is a man in Aurora, Illinois, the Speaker of the House of Representatives in Washington. When we come back, Dennis Hastert will join us. Our coverage continues.
We are back. It's 1:46 Eastern time. We're still waiting to find out who the next president of the United States will be. We can tell you that CNN does estimate, well, before I give you the turnout estimate, let me show you what the raw vote numbers are. 83% of the precincts reporting across the nation. George W. Bush, 42.1 million votes, 49%. To Al Gore's 41.4 million, 48%. This is one close election.
650,000 votes spread out of 83.5 million votes cast.
We can tell you on the turnout, and I don't know whether we're going to show you any other numbers at this point, Ralph Nader, probably not. But I will. What we can tell you is that CNN is able to estimate that the turnout among the voting age population in the United States is going to be around 50%. Now, that is an increase from the turnout in 1996, the year of the last presidential election, but only a very slight increase. So all the reports we've been hearing all day long about how the voters are turning out in record numbers, Jeff Greenfield, as you're so fond of reminding me, let's wait and see how many people actually turn out.
We go through this every 2 or 4 years. In the middle of the day, people see long lines and they say record turnout, the experts are wrong. I mean, you think about this. 4 years ago, it was a slam dunk for Clinton to beat Dole. Everyone knew how that was going to come out. Now you have, and we've all been predicting, and it turns out these predictions were right, one of the closest elections in the history of the United States, and the turnout went from 49% in 1996 to 50% in the year 2000. That is not a huge vote of passion and interest in the political process when you think about this election.
Yes.
Now, there had been predictions that the turnout would be even lower, though. So if you're thinking in that direction, you could say this was an improvement. We want to go right now to our balance of power area over there across the newsroom to CNN's Wolf Blitzer for an update. Wolf.
Judy, we want to take a look at the U.S. Senate right now to see where that balance of power in the Senate is stacking up. In the U.S. Senate, there were 35 Republican holdovers, 31 Democrats. The Republicans have won 14 seats. The Democrats tonight have won 16 seats. That brings the total to what we know right now, 49 seats for the Republican, 47 seats for the Democrats. 4 seats are still undecided. The Democrats would have to win all 4 of those seats in order to become the majority in the Senate. Let's take a look and see how close those 4 seats are. In Missouri, right now, Mel Carnahan, who died in a plane crash 2 or 3 weeks ago, he is getting 51% of the vote to Senator John Ashcroft, the Republican incumbent, 49%. But look at that actual vote total, very close. In Michigan right now, the incumbent Republican Spencer Abraham, 51% to Debbie Stabenow, the Democratic challenger. But look at that number, still very close with only 68% of the voters tallied so far. In Nebraska, the open seat, Bob Kerrey vacated that seat. The Democrat, Ben Nelson, is slightly ahead of Don Stenberg, the Republican. But look at the number, with 82% reporting very, very close. Only 6,000 votes or so making a difference in Nebraska so far. In Montana, Conrad Burns slightly ahead of the challenger, Brian Schweitzer, the Democrat. Once again, only 62% of that number is there. Let's talk to Stuart Rothenberg and see what's happening with those 4 Senate seats.
Well, Wolf, obviously these are just too close to call. It's amazing the narrow margins given the considerable votes already cast. Clearly, somebody like Conrad Burns is in better position. He's an incumbent. It's a conservative state. But none of these races look locked up at the moment.
It's going to be a long night for a lot of these races. They're going to be looking at absentee ballots. They're going to be looking at every precinct.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sure you're going to have the legal teams flying out of there from the Democratic Senate Committee and the Republican Senate Committee to make sure they're checking with ballot security and recounts and soiled ballots, things like that. So I think, you know, some of these races could drag on indefinitely. And I just would add, Wolf, it's not just these races. I was noticing a couple of the House races. I had referred to a New Jersey race, Dick Zimmer against Rush Holt, and my computer showed 100% of the vote in, and I looked a few minutes later and saw 100% of the vote in still, in a slightly different result. The latest result actually has Rush Holt ahead of Dick Zimmer by 56 votes. I don't know if that's a final or just a preliminary final.
Although we will recap, we are projecting that the Republicans will maintain the majority in the House of Representatives. Back to Judy on the National Desk.
All right, Wolf, thanks to you and thanks to Stu Rothenberg. A little while ago, we were in Aurora, Illinois, speaking with the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Dennis Hastert. We're going to go back to him now.